Hello everybody, this is National Master Scott Roods. Today I'd like to talk to you folks about some positions that I saw on Chess Mentor. If you'd like, go ahead and pause your video here and try to figure out the solution to this problem. Okay, so after the video pause, here we are. First of all, White's rook is in the wrong spot. Rooks belong behind past pawns. It doesn't matter what color they are. And the reason is, as the pawns move up the board, the rook that's behind those pawns gains more scope. And this is what I'm talking about. So this rook here has all this scope behind this passed pawn, all these squares. That's his scope. Whereas this rook only has that square for scope, which is hardly any scope at all. That could be a problem. So a rook without any mobility is not very much of a rook at all. And this rook on a8 is just passively guarding the a7 pawn. There is a tactical device that's used when the rook's in front of the pawn that you should know. It happens along the second rank right here. Okay, in this case you have to visualize that this pawn is not there. So if that pawn wasn't there, then White is actually threatening to come over here. If Black takes the pawn, let's see here, I want to get that in red. So if Black takes that pawn, then Black would actually be sitting here with his rook, and then White would skewer the king and the rook and pick this rook up here. So that's how that works. If Black doesn't take the pawn and White's rook comes over to h8, then White will simply queen the pawn. So Black is pretty much forced to take that pawn at that point. So White plays, the only move that's really reasonable in this position, plays b4, and the idea is to try to, 1, penetrate with the king, 2, get connected past b and a pawns, or 3, clear the second rank of that c7 pawn and set up that deadly skewer idea. Usually to defend against the skewer idea that we mentioned on the second rank, the defending king will stay on these files on the second rank. So on the g7, h7 squares in this case. If the pawns was on the other side of the board, it would be these two squares. And the reason is that prevents the opponent's rook from getting on the other side of the king, coming around like this. So that's why you'd want to keep your king closer. Because imagine if your king was here, if the rook came over, well, it could just take the rook. Okay, so I digressed a lot, but just want to make sure that that's clear to everybody. So after pawn takes pawn, then the king tries to penetrate the position. If the pawn doesn't take the pawn and the rook comes down, let's look at this variation. Well, then you have this situation here where you have these connected passed pawns, and even if the rook comes over and tries to take the pawn, well, now it's just too late. You can even check and give up the rook and promote the queen if you wanted to, or you could go ahead and set the skewer up, and then let me make a new variation. And then if the rook comes over, you can promote. In this case, you'll have just a free and clear rook. In the other case, you'll have a queen versus a rook. I like this case better. Okay, so back to the other position. So instead of moving the rook down after b5 and letting White establish those connected passed pawns, Black just simply takes. Now the White king comes up to b4, and well, if Black does nothing, then let's say Black does a waiting move. Let's say defends against the skewer. Well, that doesn't really matter now, because now the White king is penetrating into the position, threatening to go to b7 and also take c7 and create another passed pawn here. So from b7 and c7, it can potentially help queen the pawn. But taking c7 is pretty good, because now you're just having another pawn. Black has to deal with another pawn, so letting the king penetrate like that is not a good idea. So rather than let the king take the b pawn, black plays c6, but that's what we were hoping for, to get this second rank cleared. So now the second rank is cleared, so it's a go. So the rook swings over, and now the threat is real. White's either going to queen the pawn, or he's going to skewer the king to the rook, which is what happens. Now when the black king moves, white will take the rook and have an extra rook. Okay, next position. Okay, this is a famous position that was played. It's known as Fischer's Fiasco. It was played by Bobby Fischer as black, and Fischer had just taken a pawn on h2. So go ahead and pause your videos. Okay, back from the video pause. Boris Spassky was playing white here, and he trapped Fischer's bishop with g3. Fischer played h4, trying to crack open an escape hatch for his bishop, but king f3, Boris nails that down, makes sure that that doesn't happen. Fischer now played h3, which is clever because now the white king can't approach the bishop, but after king to g4, well, the h3 pawn is lost. So bishop g1, white doesn't have time to allow black to play h2, because then his king will be tied down on that pawn forever. So he takes the pawn, and now bishop takes. And this is the quiet, cold move that has to be played. Black wants to play bishop here and get away. Whoops, wrong diagonal. It's not even a diagonal, but okay, so bishop wants to get away on that diagonal, so instead white just cuts that off. And now the bishop is stuck. It can only hope to get one more pawn, either the e3 or the g3 pawn, and the king is going to come to g2 and gobble it up. So after that, Boris would have a bishop for 2 pawns, and his caliber of player is going to win every single time. Okay, next position. Okay, this position's a beautiful one. Let's flip the board here. Okay, go ahead and pause your videos and try to solve this. Okay, back from the video pause. The Thundering Herd is what the name of this is. Black has an armada of pawns going up the board. And pawns way up the board like that can cause all kinds of tactics and chaos. What I like about this position is, black doesn't care about the material that much, because he knows that these pawns, once they get up the board like that, they're going to be worth a lot. So he goes ahead and sacrifices the rook for the bishop, because he wants to make sure that he can control c7. Otherwise, if he doesn't, then black would have to play d6, and that weakens the light squares really bad. For example, if d6, then these squares around the king are around the pawns are very weak, and it's hard to support them. So the pawns are easily blockaded after that. It's another thing about your passed pawns like this, you don't want to get them blockaded. So he sacrifices the exchange in the interest of maintaining control of c7. And black's rooks, as Silman put it, are about as useful as bookends at this point, which I thought was really amusing. So rook a to b1, attacking b7. Black could care less about b7. So he plays f3 to control the light squares. So now the king may not approach the passers. Rook comes down, and the rook's attempting to blockade, to block the diagonal, block this diagonal right here. Cut off communication between the bishop and this pawn so that the rook can win it. It's a very dangerous pawn. So white gets his king in the game. That's the only piece not working. Guards the e5 pawn. Or what is that? e4 pawn. Rook to d4 blocks. Bishop takes, pawn takes, and now king to f4. So now we see f3's coming, f2, e3's coming, e2's coming, and white is powerless to stop it. If he tries to take this last pawn, then he gets forked, and he ends up down a whole lot of pawns in a losing position. Thundering herd. Okay, last example. Last position. Okay, in this... Okay, go ahead and pause your video. Okay, back from video pause. The Fischer's playing white here. The theme is rope-a-dope. So I know it sounds funny, but he's trying to corral black's pieces. So he starts out by playing f4, which is interesting because, well, the knight is threatening to go to f6 and fork the king and the rook. So the bishop has to move off of, stay on the diagonal. So the bishop chooses c3. And now knight to g5 threatens to corral this rook on g4. So now king f3 and king h3 are threats. Black responds by playing bishop to e1. Now that knight f6 isn't a threat, the fork on knight f6 isn't a threat. And he's trying to get his rook out via g3. But Fischer guarded g3 with his knight, and now he's threatening knight to f6, forking again, and he's also hitting d6. So his opponent played king to f8 to avoid the fork, and now Fischer just went ahead and pushed the rook away. The rook pretty much is going to be traded off. So he tries to avoid the trade, but Fischer insists, goes ahead and trades and takes the pawn and has an extra pawn. So by using the forking threat, the corralling threat where he played knight g5 to hem the rook in, and then finally defending g3 with the knight, all very nimble knight moves, and reestablishing the fork threat, and then playing the king to chase the rook away and trading at the right time, Fischer transitioned from a position where some players would try to play for mate there. I've seen players try to play for mate in positions because they just don't want to transfer from one type of position to another. So I hope that some of the ideas that I presented here, maybe you haven't seen them before or you didn't understand them. I hope that these positions, these examples clarified maybe some questions that you might have had about these types of positions. But I plan on doing another video because I feel like the Chess Mentor program is such a valuable tool in getting better. Thank you.